When it comes to video games that I have a personal interest in, Fire Emblem Three Houses has had a pretty wild ride so far. From the first trailer way back in, well, over a year ago now, holy cow. It's been a year since the first trailer came out, dang, to a long period of inactivity from IS, not revealing anything more about the game, to a delay from spring to the summer, to a blitz of Famitsu article after Famitsu article, to leaks coming about right afterwards, spurring discussion about time skips and drama, to a completely bananas E3 trailer that turned doubters into believers. This game seems to have gone from cautious optimism at best, cynicism at worst, to universal praise and excitement. So how did we get from one extreme to another? Everything started January 18th, 2017, at the first Fire Emblem Direct. After a fantastic reveal for Shadows of Valentia, we were teased that a planned 2018 release for Fire Emblem Switch was something to look forward to. And after that, nothing. Radio silence. No news, no articles, nothing to look into, for over a year and a half. Then, E3 2018 happened. We were introduced to a brand new world, story, characters, art style, on a brand new console. Fire Emblem Three Houses' first trailer brought hype around its mysterious setting. Some people really enjoyed it, some had cautious optimism, and some weren't sold. Fire Emblem fans know, especially if they've been around to the series prior to Awakening, that the first trailer for any new game of course will bring excitement, but it can also set up players for massive disappointment. Awakening, while in my opinion a great entry to the series, which brought new players into the world of Fire Emblem on a blazing hot 3DS console, had awesome looking cutscenes, had intrigue behind the masked Marth, and cool looking mechanics that the series has never seen before, as well as bringing a ton of old stuff back, but ended up having a ton of fans not finishing, or even dropping the game midway through with a bitter taste in their mouth.
Pair Up is broken, the story is terrible, Chrome sucks, self-insert characters ruined the story, the characters were just anime tropes and cliches. Lunatic Plus was BS, children characters ruined Fire Emblem. Waifuism shouldn't be in Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem was better off dying instead of this.
The us versus them, newcomer versus elitist mentality that plagued Fire Emblem forums and discussion really got intense during this time. And some disgruntled Fire Emblem fans had experienced what was their least enjoyable Fire Emblem game in this long-running franchise. And while Awakening was a smash hit, it caused those fans to remain disgruntled and concerned about the future of the series. Jump to January 15th, 3 years later after Awakening's released. Fans get a taste of what's next to come. 50 seconds in, we already see a massive departure from Awakening, or so it seemed. Two armies chasing each other down. Infantry samurais and paladins, traditional Japanese music, Azura dancing and singing, then familiar gameplay, but with a twist. Clearly Japanese-inspired sets and maps, Ryoma and Xander squaring off in full CG graphics. The teaser was awesome. Then, like 4 months later, we got the Choose Your Path trailer, and that was unbelievably good. And to be completely honest, probably the second best trailer I've seen come out of Fire Emblem, only second to the E3 Three Houses trailer that just came out recently. The black and white style, how clearly they depicted both sides, it was unreal. This was setting up to be that game with an incredible plot. Finally, we all thought, a new Fire Emblem game with a good story and good characters, or at least an improvement from Awakening's story and cast. Then the E3 trailer, continuing to build the ginormous hype. Literally, the cuts for these trailers were sick. You should rewatch these, guys. You might get chills. However, while the official trailers did their job at generating hype, scandals were beginning to arise about the localization. Skinship, a game mechanic that allowed for the player to rub faces with their comrades to build supports, were removed in the English version, causing an uproar about restricting content overseas. Even more controversial was Soleil's and Corrin's Japanese support conversation that ended up needing to be rewritten because of Western media's accusation that Corrin was trying to convert Soleil into a straight woman to fall in love with him. It was a pretty weird time to be a fan.
Oh, sorry. Is that not appropriate?
This video isn't meant to dig deep into that topic in particular, but at the time, Fates' localization team and Nintendo were getting criticized to the point of censorship to appease its Western audience. Whether these scandals affected Fates' sales is something we'll really never know, because regardless, Fates sold a boatload of copies. Fates was going to be my first 3DS game since I never owned a 3DS until 2015. As the game was getting surrounded by controversies, I actually criticized Fates a lot more on just the My Room feature in general. I thought it was completely unnecessary to the game experience and characters. The Japanese version came out first, and ROM hackers and translators were working hard just to create an unofficial translation of the game since it wasn't a global release. During this time, my optimism slowly transformed into skepticism. When Megs and I got to play Conquest, we were impressed with the gameplay, but the story, the narrative, the characters, it was a disaster. Everything that the trailers, that part of the hype train that looked the most promising, was compromised. It was dreadfully terrible. Conquest, Birthright, and Revelation had such a good premise and like the worst execution I've ever seen. And since then, FE and storytelling, especially in the later generation of games, were going to be looked at with skepticism, no matter how good the next trailer for the next game would look. During the Fates run, I felt like Fire Emblem was in a weird bind. The franchise I loved seemed to have lost its way a bit. 1/3 of Fates had fantastic map design, and 0/3 of the game had a good story to tell. The cast had mostly good supports, even though those same characters in the campaign were bumbling buffoons for the most part. Fates, regardless, was incredibly popular, and I won't fault anyone for enjoying or saying that it was their favorite game. And I think replayability of Fates is unreal. And I pretty much only say that because I like randomized runs, and Fates is really, really good at that. May 2017 came around and Fates' run was over. Honestly, I think Echoes had a great run. They advertised it really well. It seemed like the community deemed it to be that game that brought old and new fans together. Realistically, there was not a lot of people who played Gaiden, so a game being able to be a fresh take for both old and new Fire Emblem fans was pretty cool. It only had 4 months of wait time as well, and we had a few looks into the gameplay. People who didn't like Gaiden to begin with tended to not be super hyped about it, and it was fairly criticized for being a little too faithful to the original. But honestly, everyone saw that coming. It may not have been universally loved, but as far as I know, it definitely was a pleasant surprise. For the most part, the Echoes hype train was consistent for me, because you pretty much knew what to expect. And for someone who loved Gaiden, despite its flaws, I was permanently stoked. During this direct, Heroes was also introduced. And it does deserve a mention in this conversation. The game has so much push and pull with the fanbase, it's just constantly making good and bad decisions depending on who you're talking to. And that Tokyo Mirage Sessions, #FE was pretty much dead on arrival. Let's get serious here. Fire Emblem Warriors deserved to be talked about a little bit as well. That was also a game that got canned by a large portion of the community for not really living up to its expectations. It was certainly disappointing to see the cast be virtually all 3DS characters, and it was nice to have Lyn and Celica included, along with Navara's DLC, with some SD characters in the package too, and I enjoyed my time with the game. And the Fire Emblem mechanics sewn into the game made it a memorable experience for me. But I can't deny that seeing 8 billion sword characters with clone characters on top of the base game was a letdown. From an interview, one of the developers was saying that the reason they mostly went with Shadow Dragon, Awakening, and Fates characters was because they had to consider different kinds of classes that would be represented within the game, and to consider being able to switch between characters on the map, and you would want a variety of classes to be represented in order to have the most interesting kind of gameplay. That really didn't sync too well with myself and other fans, as it kind of felt like a non-answer. You wanted diversity for the classes, yet many characters felt identical in the base game. And even though they tried to stay away from using sword protagonists for the sake of diversity, the game ended up being dominated by sword heroes anyway. And because of the mind-boggling developer logic that they didn't want to complicate players around the weapon triangle, they made Leanne and Ronan sword users, instead of the originally planned Lance and Axe users respectively. So yeah, unexpectedly, Fire Emblem fans like myself were disgruntled at the development of this game. Granted, the game turned out fine, to me at least, but dear Naga, it felt like Echoes was the only game between Awakening and Warriors that didn't have some kind of weird controversy going on around it. What I found made Warriors an enjoyable game was the Fire Emblem elements sewn into it. Despite the abundance of sword users, many characters felt good to play around with. The infantry sword units weren't as interchangeable as I had thought. Ironically, it was the other types of classes that felt samey to me. A common theme with all of this is, despite the controversies and the community fraying experiences over these games, they all ended up being enjoyable. Fire Emblem just seemed to have this track record of getting in hot water, people wanting to find problems with the game in its development stages, finding reasons not to buy those games, and committing to that pessimistic mindset. But I can't really blame them though. It honestly started to feel like a par for the course thing. No matter what, Intelligent Systems, or whoever was making a Fire Emblem related game, was going to make a good one. And that's the big takeaway I learned from all these development mishaps and negative spotlights. No matter what, that game is going to be enjoyable. Even if I'm not as hyped as I was when I first saw it, I know that some aspect of that game is going to be salvageable, and will ultimately make the experience worth it. And that perspective has not failed me yet. And now we go full circle. Fire Emblem 3 Houses. Seeing the trailer for the first time left me concerned. I didn't think it was a good first debut trailer, to be honest. We didn't have a lot of context for Fodlan, the three main characters, the gameplay, or even what Edelgard was narrating over about the crests being to blame. It looked pretty, I guess, that's for sure, but for me, the experience was lukewarm, and I had to watch it a few more times to get excited for it. Compared to the Fates debut trailer, this one was kind of underwhelming for me. Like I mentioned above, we heard nothing else for over a year, and fans were starting to get a bit miffed about this silence. But then, article and article and article came out. Character profiles over Twitter, gameplay mechanics revealed in Famitsu. Content about this game was blitzed all over the internet, and all of it was cause for excitement. Cautious optimism brought back, but no sign of controversy. The closest thing to trouble was Sothis' design, but even then it felt minimal, and personally I didn't have any issues with it. Maybe it had to do with the game's release coming in the summer and no news coming out for a long time, but suddenly we were learning about tons and tons of new and old gameplay mechanics getting poured into this game. The calendar, gambits, night battalions, everything from the initial trailer that had sparked interest was finally getting elaborated on, and it was all awesome. Fresh and new, combined with mechanics from Genealogy of all games. Soon, we learned about the main characters. While there were definitely people not sold on the school setting or its mechanics just yet, it wasn't a problem. Famitsu wasn't revealing things that would cause an uproar, or some controversy that would require the localization to gut out or modify it. Was the cautious optimism still there? Of course! Character designs were a bit polarizing, concerns over the graphics, and the worry over being forced into all of these mechanics instead of a more traditional Fire Emblem experience were legit concerns. A huge fear, at least to me, was the story. Fates was a massive disappointment in both its characterization of the cast and the main development of their three plots. Yet, the character issue was being addressed as IS was drip-feeding character details. These students were brimming with personality. Some were of course loyal to the main heroes, but they weren't retainers. Many of these students are just students with appealing designs. The entire premise of the "what will you choose" hype train from Fates is a lot deeper here. Instead of the good Hoshidans and the bad Norians, you have three very interesting options with diverse characters that will appeal to literally anyone with emotions. Three Houses continues to have this magical pulling effect of challenging you on who you want to pick for a house. This isn't about political affiliation, or blood ties, or who raised you. It's simply, who do you think is cool looking? Who do you like? And unlike Soleil/Corrin, or the hubbub about whether Lucina is going to be in Warriors or not, I'm just on the edge of my seat waiting for the next character to be revealed. So, story-wise, with the reveal of Hubert and Rhea in particular, I feel like people were trying to judge the game way too early. The look of Hubert and people saying, "Oh, he's obviously evil," or Rhea saying, "Oh, she's obviously evil and so is the church." And in my experience, while I think complaints like this are just like, who is the community's prisoner of the week, I sometimes have to wonder if some of the folks complaining about certain designs are just looking for something to whine about because they're so used to it. I gotta admit though, I was also still concerned over the story. How are they going to balance an entire campaign around a school setting? These characters, outside their face and hair, or headwear, are wearing school uniforms. Is that all they get for a design? If the church is evil, how are they supposed to learn in an officer's academy with the church being also kind of the base of everything? Then the E3 trailer happened, and it blew everyone's mind. The story intrigue multiplied by 1,000 million. There's a time skip of 5 years after some massive event happens. Dimitri, who was memed on for his not so great hair design, is now arguably the coolest and most intriguing house leader of the three. Claude's personality, going from a happy-go-lucky young student into idealistic and brave leader, willing to fight for friendship and togetherness, is a sign of his own maturity. Edelgard went from being the heir to the Adressian throne to a seemingly extremely mature and intelligent woman, who is honestly giving me some Arvis vibes. This massive shift in our perception of this game's story was, I believe, very necessary to build hype around this game. We've learned a lot from this game through these articles for gameplay, character, and story. However, what this E3 trailer was able to do was dispel concerns over character design, characterizations of the main lords, and a stagnant plot. Character designs for the students are confirmed to change. We see from a 2-minute trailer that the effects of this time skip for the 3 house leaders, and now, with the introduction of this time skip, we know that this story is going to have many twists and turns. Following this incredible trailer was gameplay via GameSpot and Treehouse, showing us how the game flowed, the calendar in action, and how it feels to be a teacher and how the weekends worked. All of the groundwork laid out by those still images from Famitsu about the characters, the gameplay mechanics, and the story was finally coming to life. And how lively it is. All of this seemingly without a hitch, barring the leaks, which I guess happen. This game's development, as far as I'm concerned, hasn't been tainted by bizarre mechanics like face petting or developer infighting like what happened in Fire Emblem Warriors. This game seems dark in tone. Whatever happened to Dimitri is probably terrible. But something else that I find noteworthy is the tact that this game carries in its narrative. Fire Emblem has had some pretty serious plot points that were kind of messed up. Through the SNES age, child hunts, kidnappings, insane plots for certain babies to be born, and a hardcore betrayal were dark themes that were executed excellently, and Tellius dealt with racism and political conflict quite well. The 3DS games diverged away from the commonly serious tones that Fire Emblem has had in its history. Awakening was a pretty innocent and lighthearted game, and Fates' feeble attempt at seriousness was so bad it ended up being the most ironically hilarious game in the series. The marketing of Three Houses' interpersonal conflicts has so far been done with tact, making this story feeling like it's going to be a true return to form. And given that it draws so much inspiration from FE4, which arguably had the best story in the franchise, I have full confidence that whatever Three Houses delivers, it will be done tastefully. No Fire Emblem game that I can think of has so gracefully disproven outside criticism, even my own. It seemed like every single time I voiced my concerns over this game, the next news update would do away with those concerns. At this point, I have nothing to worry about. Every possible worry that I had about this game has been eased. I have not approached a new entry to the series with cautious optimism. Instead, I am purely hyped. Three Houses' marketing strategy, from its first trailer to its drip feed of character content, to its massive influx of mechanic reveals, to its absolutely perfect timing to reveal its time skip and mechanics in action, has succeeded in turning many skeptics into eager, very confident fans of a game before it's even been released. Relatively free of controversy, Intelligent Systems has paved the way for an extremely exciting wait till July 26th. Now, I knock on wood and cross my fingers. Please don't let this video age poorly, IS. Please. Deuces.